Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the authors and editors discuss news and events with a splash of history. Our host today is Dan Masterson. Joining him is Jim Dunnigan, well-known military author and the Dean of Wargaming. Also, joining today's show is columnist and author retired Colonel Austin Bay.
Jim, a lot's been going on, or actually hasn't been going on in Gaza recently. They announced that they were going to go into Rafah back at the beginning of March, and they backed off from that for some reason. And a lot of the units have been pulled out of Gaza. From what I understand, there's a brigade still left there that is, there's still some fighting up in the north. They're trying to keep people from going south to north. That's where that brigade is stationed, is sort of in the middle of Gaza. But where is Israel headed with Gaza? How are they going to bring this thing to a close?
Well, they're trying to basically get some loyal or reliable people in Gaza to run the place for them. That was the deal before. Hamas had long been running, Gaza, and they had people who could work with Israel, and everything was fine. The food aid came through. They could, the Palestinians could go to Israel for medical treatment and what have you, and all was good. But then, Hamas is always getting itself radicalized. It started out as a radical group, and it hasn't really changed. The radicals are always the weakest link in any organization. You make peace with your enemies, but the radicals will keep saying, hey, we're humiliated. We should have destroyed those SOBs. Let's do it. And, of course, after a while, they just, ignore the organization and just go around killing people. And that's what Hamas did, last year in Gaza. And, of course, now the PLO and the Hezbollah are trying to recover from that situation. Israel doesn't want to fight Hezbollah in the north. That's backed by Iran. The Iranians really don't want to fight Israel either. In fact, the Iranians don't want to get into a direct fight with Israel because they realize that Israel is more powerful. And if it does come to a, Iran versus Israel direct conflict, the Iranians realize that they'll be exposed as weak. Right now, they're pretending to be pretty powerful, and they rant, we're going to destroy Israel and what have you, but they can't. In fact, they have had for over a year, 2 years, enormous internal problems with the population complaining about the sanctions, the shortages, the corruption in the Iranian government, which is epic. The IRGC and the Quds Force, spending billions, literally, on fights in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere. And the Iranians are saying, "Hey, look, what about us? We're paying for all this, and we're starving." So that's, as usual, an unstable situation, which unfortunately is the norm for the Middle East.
So, Austin, how do you see things for Israel as they continue on in Gaza?
Well, in the Gaza operation so far, the Israelis have done a remarkable job of limiting collateral damage, especially lowering, the possibility of killing some civilians. They've tried to minimize it as much as you can, but it's urban warfare, and what happens with all those high explosives, that even if you have minimized civilian casualties, everything is destroyed, blown up, and those become the images of the Hamas propaganda, and Iranian propaganda. And then the Israelis have done a good job, as good as possible, I think, of killing Hamas fighters. I've seen a range of numbers. 7,000 seems to be a kind of common and coherent. And I think, given that you've had 6 months of combat, a reasonable figure. But as Jim wrote years ago, on How to Make War, the original How to Make War, a lot of the numbers that come up initially are at best estimates, and sometimes you never know what an enemy's casualties are, particularly when an enemy is a terrorist organization like Hamas. And the Hamas, however, takes whatever its loss is of its fighters, and those become civilian casualties. And then you see these large numbers of quote unquote civilians killed. Last week, I saw over 35,000 claimed on this, but this is all from Hamas and Iranian propaganda sources. And yes, I include that some so-called international organizations that are really mouthpieces for Iran and Hamas. The Israelis dispute that. But what that does is take what has been tactical successes in fighting in tunnels, fighting in narrow streets, and I would say operational successes. They've cleared out northern Gaza, as you said. They've left a brigade there, the Israelis, to try to minimize reinfiltration into the cleared out zone. So it's operational success. It hasn't become the strategic success that Israel wants and needs. And really, in my view, you can read what I wrote my Creator Syndicate column this week, on point on strategy page, is that to come as close as they can to ending Hamas's threat, they need to destroy the organization. They haven't done that. That would be the strategic victory. But because of the effective propaganda, and also it ties in with a long-term, I'll call it old cultural Marxist left in both Europe and the United States. This long anti-American streak to it as well, and now blatantly revealed what was known for a long time. It's very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish bent. It's in universities, and it's in journalism, and they are therefore paths of media and narrative influence. And that's why you see so much action here in both the United States and Europe condemning Israel. And that becomes a move that a sort of strategic isolation. I said a sort because Israel still can rely on support from various European nations and primarily the United States. Yet another factor in this isolation is a perceivable wavering on the part of the Biden administration because of all of its progressive Democrats that are, quote unquote, favor free Palestine. They're pro-Hamas. They're anti-Israel, and they're in states located in states that are swing states, and they could swing that state's electoral votes against the Biden administration. So there you have a domestic consideration by the U.S. president, and he starts hedging support for Israel. Now, Jim says that Iran doesn't want to really tangle with Israel. Okay, I take a slightly different view. First of all, they have tangled with it because Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas are all Iranian proxies. They're funded by Iran. I can't prove this, but there's a report in the last 2 or 3 days that the Hamas received $300 million just before the attack from Iran for its efforts. It's October 7th. atrocity invasion of Israel. So they're at war with Israel now, and they haven't paid much of a price until Israel has started attacking their support, special operations support, covert support nodes in Syria and elsewhere. And I say nodes, that all the Al-Quds officers that were killed in the airstrike within the last 2 weeks. Iran has developed a number of intermediate range ballistic missiles. There's reason to doubt that they would be effective against Israel's missile system. They don't have the ability to go in and attack Israel by air. They can with drones, or attempt to do it with drones. They wouldn't be decisive unless they have a nuclear weapon, which leads to, I'm going to wrap this segment up. Iran wants a nuclear weapon. They've called Israel a one-bomb state. That goes back over 20 years. Actually goes back to the 1990s. It's meaning that you drop one large bomb in there and you've damaged the Israeli state fatally. And the Israelis have to take those threats seriously, and they do. So, are we near? This is something I addressed in that column. I hope that there's not going to be an Iranian-Israeli war, and I don't think the Iranians are stupid enough to actually do it. But look, as Jim's line in there, the weakest link in any organization is your radicals. Well, they can be the most powerful organizing force inside the organization, but they are brittle because that's all they've got is radicalism. And if they get their finger on the trigger, who knows? That's why the United States has got to absolutely be steadfast behind the Israelis from a diplomatic, political, and strategic position. And right now, that's not the case.
Another thing to keep in mind is that Israel has built its own nuclear deterrent. They have a Jericho missile, ballistic missile, which currently is only being used to launch space satellites to keep an eye on Iran. But they have nuclear weapons, and the Iranians have to assume that the Israelis have Jerichos that can be quickly equipped with nuclear warheads that can be fired and reach Iran, and boom, there goes Tehran, there goes this, and there goes that. Now, that possibility is widely known to Iranians. So they realize that their very unpopular government, pushes this really too far. Iranians are going to pay the price. And that's why there's so much unrest inside Iran, because the Iranians, a lot of Iranians are pro-Israel. Before the Islamic Revolution in the 80s, there were good relations between, Shah and Israel. They were trading, they were cooperating, and that all poof went away because the Islamic radicals needed an enemy. And Israel was the perfect one. They were Semites. Well, of course, all the Arabs are Semites too, but forget that. And they basically said it was the great Satan, and the United States was a little Satan. Well, they have to be worried about the United States as well, because the United States is not going to stand by and see Israel, taking a lot of damage. Now, many people in Iran realize that, and as Austin pointed out, the radicals are the ones you got to worry about. But the radicals don't have the fingers on the trigger. Most governments in the Middle East, as radical as they may sound, they've got adult leadership when it comes to control of nuclear weapons, or weapons in general, but especially nuclear weapons. Because, like I said, the Iranians know the Israelis have their Jericho missiles, they have nuclear warheads, so if their cockamamie Iranian government plays rough and tries to launch missiles with conventional warheads, and do a lot of damage in Israeli cities, which probably won't work because Israel has the Arrow missile defense system, which they've tested. They tested it a couple of years ago in the Mediterranean. They issued a NOTAMs, a stay out of alert to maritime traffic, as they basically launched from the air ballistic missile. That's another story. We covered that. And they weren't kind of nuclear warheads, but they could be. And the Israelis blew them out of the air. The Israelis are well aware of that. So, the Iranians threatening to attack Israel carries much less weight than the fact that the Israelis can attack Iran, which the Iranians cannot intercept. They have no interceptors. So again, the Iranian radicals are radicaling their signs saying, we will destroy Israel, but they can't, and Israel can destroy Iran, or at least big chunks of it. So unless the Iranian radicals suddenly radicalized the majority of Iranians who are pro-Israel, basically, it's not going to happen. So a lot of this is simply political theater, and this is fine with the Iranians, the Iranian radicals, because it's all propaganda, and they won't get hurt, and they want to demonize Israel, but Israel is the best thing that happened in the Middle East. Egypt understands that. Jordan understands that. Turkey understands that. Even Lebanon would like to understand that, but they've been banged around by the Iranian Hezbollah for years. That may be coming to an end. As Austin pointed out, Iran ordered Hezbollah to cool it, to not take on the Israelis, because if the Israelis march north, that will be the end of Hezbollah. Israelis don't want to do it because they're going to take a lot of casualties, in the process. But Hezbollah is basically surviving on the attitude of the Israelis that we don't want to lose a lot of people getting rid of you thugs, but if we have to, we will, and that'll be the end of it. Again, Israel is a small country. Casualties are a big deal. They care more about their people than the Iranians care about the Iranian people, or most other countries care about their people. Egypt is quite reasonable. I mean, they have long had a peace deal with Israel that's been holding up well. But again, as the Western commentators put it, you have to consider the Arab street. What is being said in the coffee houses, and on the street, as it were, where there's rather propaganda placed well with politicians. Of course, that's an old story. Demonize whoever you can get away with, and let's start a war. I mean, that's what basically brought us, World War II. The Japanese, generals who are taking over the government, they basically got everybody, to tolerate at least a war with the United States, a war which even the senior, Japanese military leaders realized we could not win. In fact, one of the guys, I guess I forget his name, he was killed by the United States.
Yamamoto.
Yeah, Yamamoto. He had studied it. He spoke English. He had studied at Harvard, I think, and he understood the United States. He says, you might be able to run rampant for a few months, but then when the Americans strike back, we're finished. He was very prescient. And but like I said, when the radicals get to call the shots, everybody suffers. Among the radicals people, and of course the Arabs, radical Arabs have this attitude that Arabs that are killed are involuntary martyrs, which doesn't really they don't get much sympathy from the survivors of those involuntary martyrs. But that's how they justify this kind of genocide on their own people. And there you go. The Arab world is a place where they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and it's very hard for anyone who's thinking straight to deal with that.
So Austin,
sorry, go ahead.
one of the things that I find interesting is I have not seen much about the effect on Israel economically. This has got to be somewhat of a body blow to them with the cost of the war, but further yet, most of their force, it's not a standing force. It comes out of their citizenship and the people are taken away from their work and they're not adding to the GDP anymore. Ukraine has the same problem. So I assume that
The
this.
GDP in Israel has been reduced to about 6% because of because of dealing with the war.
Say that again, Jim. I just
6%. The GDP has taken a 6% hit because of the war. And while that won't kill them, I mean, they're still the most prosperous nation in the Middle East. And like you pointed out, or Russell pointed out, they can't afford to lose people because they haven't got made to begin with, and they're a democracy. The Iranians could order all sorts of, mass attacks like the Russians are doing in Ukraine. They're basically, mobilizing people into the infantry and launching what is called meat assault. They're just throwing people, often ill-trained, at the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians take advantage of that. They tell their guys, strictly defensive, prepare yourselves to kill as many of these poor Russian, mobilized soldiers who don't want to be there. In fact, over 1 million military-age Russian men have left Russia, illegally or illegally, since the war with Ukraine began. So, as asinine, as crazy as some of these tactics sound, that's the government speaking, and the government is not speaking for the people. The people can make up their own minds, and often they're deciding, I want no part of this. If I can't protest internally and you can't do that in Russia, I'll get the hell out of Russia. Maybe I'll come back later. Maybe I won't. But that's how we got a lot of Russians, after the revolution. A lot of Russians came to America. They said, hey, this ain't too bad. Our kids are going to learn English, get an education. This is a big improvement. So we've got millions of Russo-Americans who are now just American-Americans, and they tell stories of great-grandpa, fighting, the Bolsheviks way back in the day, 100 years ago now. So life goes on.
Dan, I was going to comment on your question. Jim said it's 6% loss in decline in Israeli GDP. I've seen between 5 and 10%. We'll go 6%.
Yeah, well, 6%. But they'll recover. Once the war is over, they're going to bounce back faster than anybody else.
Well, I was going to comment on saying that it's not been reported, actually, and a lot of really good reporting on this war. I see a paragraph, maybe 2/3 of the way through the article, commenting on Israel's situation with so many of their reservists mobilized and the ultimate long-term threat to the economy. But here's how to read it. It's also a statement about why the Israeli population, despite they are a democracy, so there's still a fight going on over the government and Netanyahu's control and the like. But they are. How do you put a number on this? 98% committed to absolutely destroying Hamas, and they're going to do it. And if they have to sacrifice, they are sacrificing. But this is also why Israel's real allies need to say, okay, here's time. They call it Lend-Lease. Instead of they need the economic support. They also need to have that, the oil imports, even though they can produce a lot of their own gas now and the like. They still depend on foreign oil imports. And as best as I can tell, Jim, you may have something more recent than I do, but up until 6-7 weeks ago, the Israelis were still getting Azeri oil off of tankers that they upload the oil off that pipeline that runs through Turkey, and then they bring it down to Israel. So a lot of the support for Israel and the necessary economic support is coming from so-called critics, or those standing with Hamas. They haven't stood in the way of the trade and flow of necessary of energy, that which makes for, as has been said before in many places, but including Strategy Page, the Middle East is a very strange place. There are a lot of bet hedging going on by predominantly Muslim nations. They definitely don't side with Iran ultimately, because remember, the Iranians are radical Shiites, and most of the Middle East are Sunnis. Plus, the Iranians are Aryans, Aryanistan, and they have a long-term hatred for Semites who happen to be both Arab and Jews. So it's the cultural and historical politics are very, very much tangled. I want to make one other comment, too, on the Israeli counterstrikes that target Iranian senior leaders. We look at it, and the way I talked about it initially was, now Israel's going to be counterattacked by the Iranians. That also sends a message that the Israelis have reached a point is that we're not going to play patty cakes with the proxies. When we can, we're going to take it to the source of the problem, which is Iran. That was what those attacks in Syria said, that Israel's already showed that it will attack targets in Iran, most of it covertly, and that gets Strategy Pages covered that on and off for at least 15 of the years, more than that likely, but including cyber attacks, such as the other things. I mean, they've done that, but they've shown you have attacked us. You forced us to take casualties. Take everything Jim said about democracies being concerned about casualties. In fact, that's one way to measure a nation's democratic responsiveness. The U.S. hates casualties. Ukrainians have trouble with it. The Turks don't like taking casualties. They don't. It becomes a political problem. It's a problem in Israel, too. But it's not a problem for a dictatorship like Iran and Russia, at least at the parent mobilization while in the war. It really is a problem for them as well. But now, to get the point I was going to make is that the Israelis are saying, the Iranians, we're going to hold you responsible. Iranian leadership, watch out. And that is that's the, instead of, hey, we're getting hit, that's the how we're going to hit you. The Ulysses S. Grant model of waging war. That's so. I'll explain that some other time, but there's a reason that it gets called that. But that's something that has put the Iranians on notice.
Well, the Iranian people would basically cheer on Israel if Israel killed their leaders, because they hate their leaders.
Yeah, speaking of leaders, one of the things that the Israelis have been doing in Gaza is decapitating the leadership there in Gaza and the Hamas leadership, but to eventually wipe Hamas out like they claim they want to do, they've got to go after the leadership in Qatar, right?
That's the very senior leadership, yes. And then Israel with the United States might be able to negotiate an end to that sanctuary. The Qataris are businessmen. It's all about the money with them. And if the United States and West in general make a point, they have more to lose by providing a shelter for what America considers terrorists. They might say, well, no, it's all about the money, and so bye, you Iranian, troublesome Iranians, go back to Iran or wherever. And that's what that comes down to. I mean, the America doesn't like to play like that because, like I say, it's all about business. And Qatar is one country that has long made itself useful as an intermediary between, the Americans, the West, and even Israel, and the radicals in the region. So they don't want to lean on the Qataris too hard, but they got to make the point, hey, look, you're getting in the way. You're not just an intermediary. You're becoming an obstacle. So, hey, what are we going to do about this? We want to remain friends and business partners. So let's make a deal. The Qataris understand that, but they drive a hard bargain.
Well, remember, Qatar is also where CENTCOM Forward is located.
Exactly. Well, that's another
huge base. Let's say I've been there 4 or 5 times, either through it or
and Carter.
It's unbelievable.
And Carter doesn't even play both sides. They're firmly pro-American because they realize, as the Gulf states have long done, because they had to deal in the past with the Turks and British and what have you. They basically hooked themselves up with some foreign power that has no designs on them, their nation. And I think it was the Saudis during World War II when they were having these conferences with the Westerners. The Saudis later came out, commented, let's make friends with the Americans. They don't want to own any part of the Middle East. They just want to make money, and we're happy to make money with them. We're happy to sell what we've got, and they're willing to pay, market prices. So we have a lot of goodwill in the Middle East, but as right here has been pointing out, it's the radicals you have to worry about. There are problems to the locals as well as to the West.
Well, it's time to wrap it up, so we'll wrap it up there, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this some more in the future.
In 2 weeks, things never end.
We'll see ya. Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye.